The fleet came out of fold space at the edge of the Sol system like a fist unclenching. 4,217 ships. The number was precise because Fleet Sovereign Drax liked precision. He liked knowing the exact count of every vessel under his command the way other beings liked knowing the exact count of their heartbeats. It was not something he thought about consciously. It was simply always there, running in the background, a quiet hum of certainty. 4,217. Enough firepower to crack a moon. Enough troop carriers to occupy 3 planets simultaneously. Enough supply ships to keep the whole machine fed and moving for 6 standard years, without resupply. It was by almost any measure anyone in 6-star systems cared to apply too much for one dead world. Drax knew that. His admirals knew that. The junior officers who served on the bridge of his flagship, Sovereign's Reach, knew that too, though they were too new to say it out loud. You didn't tell the Fleet Sovereign that he'd brought a mountain to kill a mouse. Not on your first campaign. Not on your second either. But the math was plain. The Sol system had gone quiet 31 years ago. Before that, the humans, the species that called the third planet home, had been loud, embarrassingly loud. They'd been broadcasting electromagnetic signals into deep space for over a century, before the Voth even noticed, filling the dark with their radio waves and their television signals, and their deep space probes, all of it rattling outward like noise from a bad neighborhood. The Voth Intelligence Division had a whole archive of it, music, arguments, moving pictures of their young ones doing pointless things for each other's amusement. Weather reports, sports results, and then, 31 years ago, silence. The leading theory among Voth analysts was self-destruction. Humans had a documented history of it. Multiple near-extinction events in their own records. Wars that scorched continents. Industrial choices that nearly cooked their own atmosphere. The silence fit. A species that could not stop fighting itself long enough to survive. Gone quiet because there was nothing left to make noise. The second theory was plague. The third theory, held by a small and generally ignored group of analysts in the back offices of the Voth intelligence complex, was that the humans had gone quiet on purpose. That theory had not made it into Drax's briefing file. He stood at the forward viewport of the Sovereign's Reach and looked at what from this distance was simply a star, yellow-white, unremarkable. The third planet was invisible at this range, a number on a chart, a coordinate, a target. Scan report, he said. His operations chief, a broad-shouldered officer named Sewell, pulled up the display. Outer system clean. No satellites detected past the 7th planet. No automated defense platforms. No communication signals on any frequency. A pause. No signals of any kind, Fleet Sovereign. Age of last detected signal, 31 years, 4 months, 17 days. Drax nodded. He had expected this. He had read the file 3 times on the Fold Transit, and each time it told him the same thing. Dead system, abandoned or extinct. The humans were gone, and the Sol system sat there full of ice-water asteroid clusters, rare element deposits in the belt between the 4th and 5th planets, and the 3rd planet's oceans. 6 times the water volume of the Voth, homeworld seas. Water was currency in the outer systems. Water was worth the trip even if there was nothing alive at the destination. Set advance formation, he said. Standard conquest approach. We move inward at half speed. Fleet Sovereign. Sewell's voice carried the particular tone of a man about to say something he had already decided was not his place to say, and then saying it anyway. The operation order calls for a recon sweep before we cross the outer planet's orbit. Probe deployment, then wait for return signal. Drax looked at him. Sewell stopped talking. Half speed, Drax said. We'll run probes as we advance. I'm not sitting at the edge of someone's dead solar system for 6 hours waiting for confirmation that no one is home. This was not an unreasonable position. In 30 years of conquest operations, Drax had never once encountered a dead system that was not, in fact, dead. The probes were protocol, not necessity. Protocol existed for a reason, but so did momentum. And 4,000 ships moving at half speed toward an empty target was already more caution than the situation warranted. The fleet moved. Neptune passed on the port side, a blue bruise in the dark, ringed by 2 small moons that the Voth charts described as negligible. No installations. No mining operations. Nothing. Venus followed, tilted on its side in the way that had apparently amused human astronomers for centuries. Drax had read about that in the intelligence file too. This strange fondness they'd had for the accidental angle of a gas giant. It seemed like an odd thing to feel fondness for. He launched the first probes when the fleet crossed the 7th planet's orbital path. Standard package. 6 probes, fan deployment, moving inward at speed. They would reach the 4th planet, Mars, the humans called it. a red rock with a thin atmosphere and no strategic value beyond its position, in approximately 40 minutes. Then another hour inward to the third planet itself. Drax did not watch the probe feed closely. He had reports to review, supply chain projections, occupation planning documents that his staff had prepared for the third planet, though most of those were contingency frameworks for a world that might have nothing left alive on it. If the planet was genuinely dead, the occupation planning was moot. It became a resource extraction operation instead, which required different paperwork entirely. He was reading the extraction projections when Sewell said, "Probe 2 signal lost." Drax looked up. Mid-transmission. Sewell was staring at his display with an expression that was not quite concern and not quite confusion, but lived in the territory between them. The signal terminated. Not signal degradation, it terminated. Full stop, technical failure, possibly. Sewell did not sound like a man who believed the word possibly. He sounded like a man using it because the alternative word was not one you said out loud on the bridge of a flagship without being very sure. Probe 1 is still active. Probes 3 through 6 still active and advancing. Drax set down his report. Continue monitoring. 7 minutes later, Probe 4 signal terminated. Same profile. Mid-transmission. Clean cut. Not a systems failure. Systems failures had a signature, a degradation curve, a stutter before the end. This was like someone reaching out and turning off a light. Probe 4 is gone, Sewell said, and now the not-quite concern on his face had resolved into something more definite. The bridge had gone quiet. Not dramatically. Not the theatrical silence of a bad entertainment program where every officer stops and stares. Just the particular quality of silence that falls over a group of professionals when something they don't understand has happened twice. Where were they when they went dark? Drax asked. Sewell checked. Both probes were approaching the fourth planet's orbital path. Probe 2 was approximately 200,000 kilometers inward of the seventh planet's orbit. Probe 4 was, he stopped. Was what? Was in almost exactly the same position, different vector, same distance band. Drax stood up. There was a region of space, apparently, running along a band roughly 200,000 kilometers inside the seventh planet's orbit, where probes went dark. 2 data points were not a pattern. 2 data points were a coincidence, and Fleet Sovereign Drax had not reached his rank by mistaking coincidence for pattern. But he had also not reached his rank by ignoring 2 data points when they aligned. Halt the remaining probes, he said. Hold them at current position. I want full sensor sweep of that orbital band. Everything we have, all frequencies, gravitational, electromagnetic, thermal, the full spectrum. The sensor arrays of 4,000 ships were not a subtle instrument. Together they could detect a single power cell at 10 million kilometers. They swept the orbital band for 22 minutes. They found nothing. No debris from the lost probes, no energy signatures, no physical obstruction, no signal interference source. The band looked exactly like the rest of the outer system, empty, cold, and dead. Drax stood at the viewport and looked at the star that was getting slowly larger as the fleet advanced at half speed. And he thought about the 2 probes. And he thought about 31 years of silence. And he thought about the small group of analysts whose theory had not made it into his briefing file. He thought about that for a while. Resume probe advance, he said. All 4 remaining probes. And get me a direct channel to the fleet, all ships. The channel opened. 4,217 vessels listening. This is Fleet Sovereign Drax. We have experienced an anomaly with 2 recon probes in the outer approach zone. Cause is undetermined. All ships are to maintain formation integrity and run continuous passive scans on full spectrum. Report any irregularity immediately. Any irregularity, a temperature variance, a gravitational microfluctuation, a signal ghost. Anything that your instruments show that your instruments should not be showing, report it. A pause. That is all. He closed the channel. His second-in-command, High Admiral Bress, appeared at his side. Bress was older than Drax, had turned down Fleet Sovereign 3 times to stay in the field, and had the particular quality of stillness that belonged to beings who had been in enough dangerous situations to know what danger felt like before it announced itself. You think something is here, Bress said. It was not a question. I think 2 probes don't vanish in the same orbital band without a reason, Drax said. Sensor sweep found nothing. I know. Bress was quiet for a moment. That's worse. Drax did not answer, because Bress was right and there was nothing useful to add to a true statement. The remaining probes advanced. Probe 1 reached the 200,000 kilometer band, past the 7th planet's orbit, and crossed it without incident. Probe 3 crossed it. Probes 5 and 6 crossed it. All 4 probes continued inward, steady and transmitting. Drax released a breath he had not realized he was holding. Technical failure then, 2 probes out of 6. The equipment was old. This was not a high-priority mission. The resourcing reflected that, and old probe units had old components. He made a note to have a word with the logistics division when they returned. Sending 4,000 ships into a system and equipping them with probe units that failed at a rate of 30% was not acceptable. The probes moved toward Mars. The fleet moved with them, slow and vast and bristling. Probe 1 reached the Mars orbital path first. Its camera array swept the planet, rust red as advertised, cratered and cold, the thin atmosphere showing as a faint haze at the rim of the planet in the probe's imaging. Olympus Mons was visible, the enormous dead volcano that the humans had apparently been very proud of. Some of their old broadcasts had mentioned it. Nothing else. No lights on the surface, no orbital installations, no satellites. The planet looked the way the planet was supposed to look, old and empty and done. With everything. Probe 1 on station at Mars orbit, Sewell reported. Clean scan, no anomalies, Drax nodded. And then Probe 1's signal terminated. Clean, mid-transmission, the same profile as the first 2. The bridge silence this time was different. It had weight. Probe 3, Drax said, still transmitting, 40 seconds from Mars orbital path, 40 seconds. Everyone on the bridge counted them without counting them. Probe 3 reached the Mars orbital path. For 11 seconds, it transmitted clean data. The surface of Mars in steady detail, the thin sky, the old volcano, the rust and the rock and the nothing. Then it was gone. Drax did not move. He stood at the viewport and looked at the star ahead, and felt something he had not felt in 30 years of conquest operations moving up his spine. He knew the feeling. He had felt it twice before, in situations that had later taught him that the feeling was not weakness. It was information. The feeling was, something is wrong in a way I do not yet understand. Probe 5, he said. His voice was even. Redirect. Hold it at the Mars orbital approach. Do not cross the line. Understood. Probe 6. Same. Hold position. Fleet Sovereign Breath said quietly. I know, Drax said. 4 probes gone. Each one going dark at a boundary. First the outer band, now the Mars orbital line. Something was sitting at these lines. Something that their sensor sweep of 4,000 ships had not found. Something that could reach out and touch a probe in transit and leave no trace, no debris, no energy signature, nothing. Something that had had 31 years to get very good at not being seen. Drax turned to face his bridge. All ships to combat readiness, he said. Full weapons hot. Defensive screens up. A pause. And someone get me the analyst file. The full archive. I want everything we have on human military development from their last 20 years of broadcasts. Sewell looked up from his station. Fleet Sovereign, what are we looking for? Drax looked back at the viewport. At the star that was still just a star. At the dark around it that held nothing his instruments could find. I want to know, he said, what they were building before they went quiet. He did not say. I want to know if we made a mistake coming here. He did not need to. Every officer on the bridge was already thinking it. The fleet held its position at the Mars orbital approach. 4,217 ships, weapons hot, screens up. Scanning a darkness that scanned back with nothing that showed on any instrument they had. Somewhere in that dark, past a line their probes could not cross, something was waiting. It had been waiting for 31 years, and it was not in any hurry. The order to send in the recon wing was not made in panic. Drax was careful about that. He sat with the decision for 40 minutes before he gave it, which was not something he was known for. Fleet sovereigns were known for decisiveness. For the kind of command that moved like a blade, fast and clean and without hesitation. 40 minutes of sitting at a viewport, staring at a red planet that 8 probes was not decisive. His admirals knew it, his bridge crew knew it, he knew it himself. But 4 probes were gone, and the sensor grid of 4,000 ships had found nothing, and the file on human military development from their final years of broadcasting had turned out to be less useful than he'd hoped. Most of it was noise, political arguments, economic reports, entertainment. The military content was fragmented, partial, deliberately vague even in their own public communications. Humans had apparently learned early that broadcasting the specifications of their weapons systems to the entire galaxy was not wise, which meant the archive told him what they'd been thinking about, but not what they'd actually built. What they'd been thinking about in their last decade of broadcasting was defense. Not conquest, not expansion, defense. The distinction had seemed unimportant to the analysts who'd compiled the file. A species preparing to defend itself was a species that expected to be attacked, and a species that expected to be attacked was a species that knew it was not alone. And a species that knew it was not alone was either building a wall, or building a weapon, or building both. What they'd built, The file could not tell him 40 minutes. Then Drax gave the order, 60 ships, his best recon wing, fast, well-armed, piloted by officers who'd run 100 approach operations between them. Not enough to glass a planet, but more than enough to deal with whatever was sitting at the Mars orbital line and making probes disappear. 60 ships could handle a defense platform, a minefield, a hidden installation. 60 ships were, by any standard calculation, serious. Wing Commander Subblade Vex took the assignment without comment, which was how Drax knew she was the right choice. Officers who asked questions before a recon run were officers who were already looking for reasons to come back early. Vex had never come back early. He watched her wing peel away from the main formation, 60 ships tightening into a spearhead, moving toward Mars at three-quarter speed, aggressive enough to be decisive and careful enough to be alive. Maintain open channel with the wing, he told Sewell. Channel open. The wing moved. Drax watched the formation on the tactical display, 60 points of light closing the distance to the red smear of Mars in the display's scale. Around him the main fleet held position, 4,000 ships running hot in the dark, waiting. Vex's voice came over the channel, clipped and professional. Wing at outer approach, scans negative, nothing on any band. Understood, Sewell said, moving to mid-approach. Still negative. A pause, and in the pause was the particular quality of someone who was checking their instruments a second time, not because they doubted them, but because the instruments were telling them something boring, and boring felt wrong. This is a dead planet. Genuinely nothing here. Drax said nothing. The wing advanced. Mars grew in the tactical display, the scale shifting as the 60 ships entered close approach range, the planet resolving from a smear into a sphere, rust-red and massive and old. Wing on station, Vex said. Beginning orbital survey pass. I'm seeing, she stopped. Subblade, Sewell said. A 3-second silence. In combat operations, 3 seconds was a long time. I'm seeing the surface, Vex said. Her voice had changed. It was still professional, still controlled, but there was something underneath it now. Something that the control was working harder than usual to hold down. I'm seeing the surface, and I'm seeing. She stopped again. Vex. Drax's voice now. Direct, fleet sovereign. Another pause, and this one was different from the others. This one was the pause of a person who was choosing words, because the first words that came to mind were not words you said in a report. The surface is opening. The bridge of the sovereign's reach. Went still. Clarify, Drax said. The surface of the planet, it is opening. She seemed to be testing each word before she put it down. The way you tested ice before you stepped on it. I'm counting. There are doors, Fleet Sovereign, in the rock. Cut into the rock. They are large. They are a beat. They have been there a long time. The rock around the seams is weathered. These are not new. Drax stood up from his seat. He had not done that in the 40 minutes of sitting. He stood now without deciding to stand. The way your body makes certain decisions before your mind finishes the thought. How many doors? He said. The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. He counted. I'm still counting, Vex said. Fleet Sovereign, I need you to understand that I am giving you accurate numbers. I am looking at my instruments, and I am giving you what they show me. How many? North face of the large volcano alone, Olympus Mons. I'm reading 47 doors. I'm scanning south now, and a sound that was not quite a word. The whole planet. They cut doors into the whole planet. On the tactical display, Drax watched the 60 points of light that were Vex's wing begin to spread out reflexively, pulling apart from the tight spearhead into a looser formation. The pilot's instincts responding to information that their minds were still processing. Hold formation, Vex snapped at her wing, and the points tightened back up. She had good people. What is coming out of the doors? Drax said. Another silence. And then Vex said something she had never said in 40 years of service. She said it quietly, in the voice of someone who had looked at a thing and needed a moment before they could make it mean something. Ships, she said. Human ships. They are rising. In formation. Fleet Sovereign, they are rising in formation. Drax turned to his tactical display and pulled the feed directly from Vex's wing sensors, and the display filled with what the wing was seeing, and for a moment, a fraction of a moment that he would never admit to anyone, not even Bress, he could not process the scale. The ships were rising from the surface of Mars the way smoke rises from a fire, steady and even and without urgency. Each one came up through its door and took position in the space above the planet, and the position it took was not random. They were slotting into a formation the way components slot into a machine, each one knowing its place, each one moving with the precision of something that had rehearsed this moment so many times the rehearsal had become instinct. They were not small ships. Some of them were larger than anything in Drax's fleet. Not most of them. Most of them were comparable in size to his mid-range combat vessels. But some of them were very large, and those large ones rose last. And when they took their positions in the formation was complete, and it sat there above Mars like a second moon, and it said nothing, and it did nothing, and it simply was. Count, Drax said. Sewell was working his instruments. The bridge was so quiet that Drax could hear the sound of Sewell's fingers on the panel. I'm reading. Sewell stopped. Read. Fleet Sovereign. I am reading 587 vessels of human configuration. Across all size classes, another pause. Plus the doors are still open. They were still open, and more ships were still coming out. Drax watched the count climb. 600, 650, 700. The doors on Mars were not finished. The planet had not given them everything yet. Ship after ship slid out of the rock and took its place in a formation that kept expanding, kept adding to itself, kept becoming more than it had been 30 seconds ago. Vex's wing of 60 ships sat in the space between the main Voth fleet and the human formation, and they were very, very quiet. At 800 vessels, Drax said, Vex, back your wing off. Hold at 10,000 kilometers from the human formation. Moving now, Vex said, and her voice was steady again, which Drax respected, because nothing about what she was looking at warranted a steady voice. The human ships did not move when the wing pulled back. They held their formation above Mars, and they did not advance, and they did not speak, and they did not do anything except exist in a way that was getting harder to look at directly. 900 ships. Fleet Sovereign, Bress said at his side. I see it. The construction time for vessels of these specifications. I know. They started before they went silent. I know, Bress. Because that was the part that was hitting him now, not the number. The number was still climbing and would keep climbing for another few minutes. But the time. The 31 years of silence. The humans had not gone quiet because they were dead. They had not gone quiet because they were afraid. They had gone quiet, and they had put their heads down, and they had built. For 31 years, inside a planet, in the dark and the silence they had built. This was not a defense force assembled in panic. This was a thing that had been planned and constructed and hidden and rehearsed. And the planning had started at least a decade before the silence, which meant that somewhere around 40 years ago, a group of human beings had sat in a room and decided that the galaxy was dangerous, and that the right response to a dangerous galaxy was not to make noise and hope for the best, but to go quiet and build something that made the danger irrelevant. The count reached 940, then 950. Then the doors of Mars stopped opening. The last ships took their positions. The formation sat complete and still above the red planet, and the number on Sewell's display held 961 vessels. Drax stared at the number. His fleet had 4,217 ships. On paper, he still had the advantage. On paper, he outnumbered this force by more than 4 to 1. But 4 to 1 only meant something if you knew what 1 was worth. He did not know what one human ship was worth. He did not know what weapons they carried, what defensive systems they ran, what their tactical doctrine looked like. He knew nothing about them except what their ships looked like from the outside. And their ships, looked at from the outside, did not look like the ships of a species that had been hiding in a planet for 30 years out of fear. They looked, from the outside, like ships that had been designed by people who knew exactly what they were building them to do. Vex, he said. Fleet Sovereign, what is your tactical read? A pause. Vex had been doing this long enough to know what the question meant. Not, what do you see? He could see everything she could see. The question meant, you are 60 ships sitting between me and nearly 1,000 unknowns. What does your gut say? My gut says, Vex said carefully, that we are currently positioned in a space that the human fleet has already calculated for. That the distance my wing is sitting at, the angle we came in on, the approach vector the main fleet is holding. I think they knew we were coming, and they placed themselves accordingly. Another pause. My gut says that when those doors opened, we were already inside something. We just couldn't see the edges of it yet. Drax said nothing, because Vex was his best wing commander and her gut had been right 40 years of service, and there was nothing useful to add to a true statement. 961 ships sat above Mars and said nothing and did nothing. And Drax stood on the bridge of his flagship at the head of 4,000 ships and felt the shape of a decision forming in front of him, heavy and cold, the kind of decision that would be in the history files, no matter which way he made it. He had come here for water and rare metals and an empty planet. He was standing at the edge of something that was not empty, something that had been waiting for him. For 31 years, in the dark under a red planet, While the galaxy assumed it was dead, humanity had been waiting. And now it looked at him across the dark, 961 ships deep, and it still said nothing, because it did not need to. The doors of Mars stood open behind it like a statement. We have more. The transmission request came from the human formation 17 minutes after the last door on Mars stopped opening. Not a weapons lock, not an advance, a transmission request. The protocol flag on it was standard interstellar first contact format, the kind of flag that every spacefaring species used when they wanted to talk to someone they had not talked to before. Clean, formal, and utterly surreal coming from a species that had spent 31 years pretending not to exist. Drax stared at the flag on his communications panel for a long moment. Bress, standing at his right side, said nothing. He was good at that. Accept it, Drax said. The channel opened. The voice that came through was a woman's voice. It spoke in Voth, not perfectly. There was a slight flatness to the vowels. The accent of someone who had learned the language from recordings rather than from living speakers. But it was clear and fully intelligible, and it did not stumble. She had practiced. Or someone had practiced on her behalf, and she had been handed the result, and either way the effect was the same. The first thing humanity said to the Voth Armada was said in the Voth's own language. That was a choice. Drax noted it the way you noted a blade being set on the table before negotiations. Not a threat, an indication of preparation. Fleet Sovereign Drax, the voice said. My name is General Yara Chen. I command the Sol Defense Grid. I want to be straightforward with you about several things, and I would prefer if we could do this without anyone dying. I think we both have enough information by now to agree that dying would be a waste of everyone's time. Drax glanced at Sewell, who was running a source trace on the transmission. Sewell looked up and pointed down. The signal was coming from the surface, Mars, underground. She was not on one of those ships. She was in the rock, in whatever installation had built those ships. Watching this from somewhere he could not reach without going through 961 vessels first. General Chen, Drax said. His own Voth was, of course, perfect. You have my attention. Good, she said. Then let me tell you where we are. No preamble, no pleasantries. The flatness in her voice was not rudeness. It was efficiency, the tone of someone who had a great deal to say and had already decided which parts of it mattered. Your fleet is currently positioned at the Mars orbital approach. Roughly 1,200 of your ships have crossed what I'll call the engagement threshold, the Mars orbital line, and a band in the outer system. The remaining 3,000 or so ships are outside that threshold. I want to explain what that distinction means before you make any further movement decisions. Drax said nothing. He was listening to the words and listening to what was under the words at the same time. She was not angry. She was not performing strength for the benefit of her own people. Her voice had no audience in it. None of the slight inflation that crept into voices when they were being recorded for history. She was talking to him the way a person talked to someone they needed to understand something quickly. That was, in its own way, more unsettling than anger. The 1,200 ships inside the threshold, Chen continued, are currently in range of a system we call the Sol Defense Web. The web is a network of signal disruption nodes distributed across the inner system. I won't explain the technical details because they won't change your situation and we'd be here all week. What I will tell you is what it does. She paused. Just one beat. Fleet Sovereign, please ask your operations chief to run a weapons system diagnostic on the ships currently inside the Mars orbital line. Drax looked at Sewell, a slow look, the kind of look that asked a question without asking it. Sewell was already running the diagnostic. His face as the results came back did something complicated. Fleet Sovereign, Sewell said, tell me. Ships inside the Mars orbital line are. Their weapon systems are. Sewell stopped, started again. Navigation is functioning. Engines are functioning. Life support nominal, communications functioning. A pause that had weight. Weapon systems across all vessels inside the threshold are reading inactive. The bridge was completely silent. Not damaged, Sewell said, as if this distinction needed to be made clear to himself as much as anyone. Not destroyed, inactive. The systems are present and intact, but they are not responding to activation commands. 1,193 ships. Drax had not ordered any of them to fire. He had had no reason to order them to fire, but the knowledge that he could not order them to fire, if he wanted to, that the option had been removed without his knowledge, without a shot, without a single visible action from the human formation that still sat above Mars saying nothing, he breathed through it. General Chen, he said. His voice was even. He was proud of how even it was. You have my full attention now. I thought I might, she said, and there was something in her voice that was almost, not quite but almost gentle. not mocking. Something more like the tone of a person who had imagined this conversation many times and was finding the reality of it exhausting in a way they had expected. I want to be clear about something. This is not an attack. The web is a defensive system. It does not destroy ships. It does not harm personnel. It removes offensive capability from vessels that are inside a defined perimeter. The distinction matters to me, so I'm telling you. Defensive, Drax said. Yes. You have disabled 1,200 warships. I have removed their weapons capability, yes. Their crews are fine. Their ships are intact. If your fleet withdraws past the outer threshold, I will deactivate the web and your weapons will restore. Everything goes back to the way it was. A pause. I want you to have a clear picture of your options before we continue this conversation. Drax turned to Bress. Bress had the look of a man who was doing math. Old, experienced math, the kind that didn't need a panel to run, the kind that ran in the back of your mind over decades of campaign operations and came back with answers that fit on one line. Bress said very quietly, 1,200 ships can't fire. 3,000 ships outside the threshold can, if he calls them in. They enter the web's range, Drax said. Yes. And then we have 4,000 ships that can't fire. Bress said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Drax turned back to the communications panel. General Chen, he said. You said you wanted to be straightforward. I'll ask you a direct question and I expect a direct answer. That's a reasonable expectation, she said. How far does this web extend? A pause. 3 seconds. Far enough, she said. It was not an evasion. It was a precise answer. It told him exactly what she needed it to tell him. That the boundary of the web was not a fixed line he could calculate and exploit. That the web was larger than the Mars orbital threshold. And that she was not going to give him the specifications he would need to find its edge. It told him, in 2 words, that there was no tactical solution to the web available to him from outside. He had brought 4,000 ships to a system that had spent 31 years building a cage. And he was already partially inside it. I want to understand something, Drax said. He kept his voice measured. A conversation, not a negotiation, not yet. You've been silent for 31 years. Your people went dark. The whole galaxy assumed you were gone. You spent that time building this. A gesture at the tactical display. At the 900 ships and the web and the dead system that was not dead. Why? The pause this time was longer. 5 seconds. He got the impression she was deciding not what to say but how much to say. Because we were watching, she said. For 31 years we were watching. We know what's out there. We know what the Voth have done to 12 other systems. We know what the hegemony did to the Teresi. We know what happens to species that make noise before they're ready. The flatness in her voice stayed flat, but underneath it was something that had been carried a long time. We decided to be ready first. Drax sat with that. Ready first. Not first to strike, not first to expand, first to be ready. On his tactical display, 1,200 of his ships sat in a perimeter they could not shoot their way out of. 961 human vessels held their positions above Mars, unhurried, unmoving, and somewhere beneath the surface of the red planet, in an installation that had been carved into the rock over decades, a woman who had spent her career preparing for this specific morning sat at a channel and waited for him to understand his situation. What is it you want? Drax said. Right now, Chen said. I want you to hold your position and not call your outer fleet forward. That's all. I want 30 minutes. A beat. After 30 minutes, you'll have enough information to make a real decision. And I want you to make a real decision, Fleet Sovereign. Not a panicked one. Not a proud one. A real one. Drax looked at the display. At the numbers. At the 1,200 ships sitting blind and the 3,000 sitting outside and the 961 sitting still and the doors of Mars standing open behind them. You have 30 minutes, he said. Thank you, she said. The channel stayed open. She had not closed it. Drax turned to his bridge crew, who had been standing in the particular stillness of people, who had understood every word of a conversation in a language they didn't speak, and were waiting to be told what it meant. Status on outer fleet, he said. Holding at threshold, Sewell said. All ships on combat ready, awaiting orders. Hold them there. Drax moved to his tactical station and pulled up the full system display, the whole Sol system. All the way from the outer planets in, the web's known boundary, the human formation, the human installation inside Mars. He stared at it. Bress appeared beside him. She's not wrong about the 30 minutes, Bress said. No, if you call the outer fleet in. I know. 4,000 ships inside a web we can't map, with no weapons capability. Bress was quiet for a moment. Against 961 vessels whose specifications we do not have. Drax said nothing. She offered withdrawal, Bress said. Weapons restore on withdrawal. She offered it once. Yes, they stood side by side looking at the display. Somewhere in the display, in the space around Mars, in the dark between the planets, the Sol Defense Web was sitting in its invisibility and doing its work on 1,200 warships, and the number of people in the galaxy who had known it existed before this morning was apparently very small, and all of them were human, and they had kept that secret for 31 years. Drax thought about that, about the discipline it took, the patience, the silence. He thought about his briefing file with its theories about why the humans had gone quiet, self-destruction, plague, and in the back offices unread, the third theory. He thought about the analyst who had written that third theory, and whether they were still alive, and whether, if they were somewhere right now in the quiet of their back office, with the particular expression of someone who had been right for 31 years, and was only now finding out they were right. Fleet Sovereign, Sewell said. We have 28 minutes remaining. Drax straightened up. He looked at the display one more time, at the numbers, at the shape of the thing he was standing inside. Get me the full weapons diagnostic on every ship inside the threshold, he said. I want to know exactly what we have and what we don't have. I want the outer fleet commanders on a closed channel, not general broadcast, closed channel only. I don't want this conversation on open comms. Understood. And someone find me everything we have on the Sol Defense Web. He moved back toward the viewport. I want to know if anyone in the galaxy has ever heard of it before today. He already knew the answer, but he wanted to see it confirmed in writing. The answer, when it came back 4 minutes later, was exactly what he expected. Nothing. No record, no intelligence, no rumors. No mentions in any Voth archive, any shared intelligence treaty database, any intercepted communication from any spacefaring species in the last 31 years. The humans had built it and told no one. For 31 years, in the silence, they had built the thing that was currently holding 1,200 of his ships in a fist they couldn't feel, and not a single signal about it had leaked into the galaxy's noise. Not one. He stood at the viewport and looked at the yellow-white star ahead of him, and thought about the kind of people who could do that, who could take an entire civilization off the air and put it to work on a single, secret, long project and hold that secret for 3 decades against every natural human tendency to be loud, to share, to broadcast, to tell someone what you'd made. The kind of people who could do that were not the kind of people you found in his briefing file. He had 24 minutes left, and for the first time in 30 years of conquest operations, Fleet Sovereign Drax used them to think. The 30 minutes passed. Chen did not fill them. She left the channel open and said nothing, which was either courtesy or a form of pressure so refined it barely felt like pressure at all. Drax had spent the time doing what he'd said he would do, talking to his outer fleet commanders on closed channel, reviewing the weapons diagnostic, staring at a display that kept showing him the same numbers no matter how many times he looked at it. The numbers did not improve. When the 30 minutes ended, he opened the channel. General Chen, Fleet Sovereign. Her voice came back immediately. She had been waiting. Have you made a decision? I have a question first, he said. Go ahead. The web, he kept his voice level. You said it's a defensive system, that it removes weapons capability without causing damage. He paused. I want to know if that's the full extent of it. If there are other capabilities you haven't described. A silence. Longer than her previous ones. That's a fair question, she said. And I'll answer it honestly. The web is one part of the Sol defense grid. It's not the only part. Another pause. If you're asking whether I have options beyond disabling weapons, yes, I do. I'd prefer not to use them. I'd strongly prefer not to use them. But they exist, and I think you should know that before you decide anything. Drax looked at Bress. Bress looked back at him, with the face of a man who had already done the math, and did not like the answer. I'm going to call forward 500 ships from my outer fleet, Drax said. Into the threshold, into your web's range. A beat of silence. Fleet Sovereign, Chen said carefully. I'd advise against that. I understand your advice, he said. I'm calling them forward anyway. Another silence, longer. When she spoke again, her voice was the same flat, tired efficiency it had always been. But there was something underneath it now that had not been there before. Not anger. Something that might have been the opposite of anger. A kind of controlled sadness. The feeling of someone watching a thing happen that they had spent years hoping would not happen. All right, she said. I want you to know that what you're about to see is not meant as a demonstration of superiority. It is not meant to humiliate you or frighten you. It is meant to give you accurate information so that you can make a better decision. A pause. That's the only reason. Drax found that he believed her. He wasn't sure what to do with that. He opened the outer fleet channel and gave the order. 500 ships. Fast advance. into the threshold. On the tactical display, 500 points of light broke from the outer formation and began to move, shaping into a broad wedge as they accelerated, crossing the dark between the outer system and the Mars orbital line with the smooth, terrible momentum of objects that massed as much as small moons. 500 warships, fully armed, because they were outside the web's range when they started moving, their weapons hot and active, their targeting systems running. Drax watched them cross the distance, watched them approach the outer threshold, the band in space where his first two probes had gone dark, watched them cross it. For 6 seconds they were fine. 500 ships inside the threshold, and then inside the threshold, their weapons began to go quiet one by one as the web found them, and that was expected. That was the part he already knew, and he watched the weapons diagnostics update on his panel. Inactive, 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 rippling down the list of 500 ships like a hand drawing a line through a column of numbers. And then something else happened. It did not happen with a sound. It did not happen with a flash of light or an explosion or any of the things that happened in combat when ships died. It happened in the absolute silence of deep space, which was the only kind of silence there was out here. And what it looked like from the tactical display was simply this. 500 points of light went dark. Not the way a ship went dark when it was destroyed. There was no debris signature, no energy bloom, no shockwave registering on the gravitational sensors. The points simply stopped being on the display. One moment they were there, moving, massing, fully present in every sensor reading the Sovereign's reach. Was running. The next moment they were not. 500 ships, gone. The bridge of the Sovereign's reach made no sound for a long time. Drax stood at his tactical display and looked at the space where 500 ships had been and were no longer, and he was aware of his own breathing in a way he was not usually aware of it, and he was aware of the complete stillness behind him where his bridge crew had stopped moving, stopped talking, stopped doing anything except looking at the same display he was looking at. Sewell, he said. Fleet Sovereign. Sewell's voice had the quality of a man speaking through something. Tell me what the sensors show. No debris. Sewell was reading from his panel in the careful voice of someone who was reporting what the instruments said, and not what the instruments meant, because the instrument's meaning was not something he was prepared to put words to yet. No energy signature, no gravitational anomaly, no communication signal. No, there is no trace of 500 ships, Fleet Sovereign. The sensors show empty space. Thermal? Clean. Electromagnetic? Clean. Gravitational mass reading? A pause. Clean, Sewell said. Fleet Sovereign. The mass of 500 ships is not registering on gravitational sensors. Whatever happened to them, it did not leave them in normal space. Drax breathed. General Chen, he said. I'm here, she said. Her voice was quiet. Not triumphant, just present. Where are my ships? They're safe, she said. All personnel are unharmed. The ships are structurally intact. They are currently held in what we call a fold anchor, a localized compression of space-time that functions as a pocket. The ships are in the pocket. They're not in your dimension of normal space, but they're not damaged, and they're not dead. A pause. I want to be very clear about that. They're not dead. You folded space, Drax said. Yes, around 500 ships. Yes, he had heard of this technology. Theoretical papers from Voth physicists, from hegemony researchers, from 3 or 4 other species that had published speculative models over the last century, folding space-time as a weapon system, containing targets in a pocket dimension. Every paper had concluded the same thing, that the energy requirements were so vast, the precision so extreme, that a functional system was at minimum a century away from any known civilization's capability. Every paper had been written by people who did not know about the Sol defense grid. How long have you had this? He said. It was not quite a question. It was more like a thought that had fallen out of his mouth. The fold anchor took 22 years to make work, Chen said. We lost a lot of people figuring it out. Something moved briefly across the flatness of her voice. We lost a lot of people in this whole project. None of this was easy. I want you to know that. I'm not standing here telling you about fold anchors and defense webs because any of it was cheap or simple, or because we're trying to intimidate you. For sport, briefest pause. We built this because we had to, because the math of the galaxy said we had to. Drax said nothing. In the room behind him, in the stillness of the bridge, he heard something he had not expected. A voice. Young, lower rank, not someone who should be speaking on the bridge of a flagship during a command-level negotiation. Sir, the voice said. One of his junior officers. First campaign. Drax should have silenced him. Protocol was clear, he didn't. Speak, Drax said. Were the humans, were they always like this? Did they always have this? Before Drax could answer, a different voice spoke, older. The weapons chief, a 20-year veteran named Kor who had been to war 9 times and spoke rarely and accurately. No, Kor said, they became this. A pause. There's a difference. The bridge was quiet again. Drax turned back to the display. At the space where 500 ships used to be, and above Mars where 961 human vessels still held their positions, still unmoving, still saying nothing. At the outer threshold where his remaining outer fleet sat in combat-ready formation waiting for an order. I want to ask you something, he said to Chen. Not tactical, not about the grid. He chose the next words carefully. My intelligence file on your species. It goes back 120 years of your broadcasts. You were loud, you fought each other. You nearly destroyed your own planet multiple times. You were, from a strategic analysis standpoint, you were not a species that appeared to be going anywhere good. He paused. And then you built this. Not just the technology, the discipline, the silence, the 30 years. He paused again. What changed? The silence on Chen's end was the longest yet. Long enough that Drax wondered if she was going to answer at all. We got scared enough, she said finally. Just that, no elaboration, no history lesson. 4 words dropped into the channel and left there, and Drax understood that he was not going to get more than 4 words on this subject. And that those 4 words were the whole answer, as complete as an answer could be. A species scared enough to go quiet, scared enough to work in the dark, scared enough to give 40 years to a project most of its people would never know about. That would not benefit anyone alive when it started. That was entirely and only for the future, for the morning, whenever it came, when something showed up at the edge of the solar system and pointed itself inward. Drax had fought 30 years of wars against species that were afraid. Fear made species frantic. Fear made them loud and desperate and reactive and prone to mistakes. He had never fought a species that had taken its fear and made it into something patient. He turned from the display and looked at Bress. Bress looked back at him with an expression that Drax had not seen on Bress's face in 30 years of campaigning together. Bress, who had turned down Fleet Sovereign 3 times, who had been in enough dangerous situations to stop being surprised by danger. Bress looked like a man who had just finished revising something he had believed for a very long time. Your outer fleet, Chen said. You have roughly 3,000 ships still outside the threshold. I want to tell you clearly what happens if they come forward. Not a threat, a statement. The voice of someone reading from an accurate report. They enter the web. Their weapons go inactive. And if I determine that the collective advance constitutes an aggressive action rather than a positional adjustment, I activate additional fold anchors, a beat. I don't want to hold 3,000 ships in fold space, Fleet Sovereign. I want to be honest. The energy draw of that would be significant even for us. And more practically, I don't want to hold 3,000 ships because that is not what any of this was built for. Her voice shifted, barely. A fraction. It was built so this conversation could happen instead of something else. Drax stood at the viewport for the last time and looked at the yellow star. Thought about 31 years of silence. Thought about 22 years of work to make a fold anchor function. Thought about the engineers in the dark under the rock of Mars, working on something that would not be tested until the morning it was needed. Trusting that the morning would come, and trusting more that the work would hold when it did. Thought about the junior officer's question behind him. Were they always like this? And Kor's answer. They became this. There's a difference. He turned back to his bridge. Stand down the outer fleet advance, he said. Hold position outside the threshold. All ships, hold position. He moved to the communications panel. General Chen, Fleet Sovereign. My 500 ships, he said. When do I get them back? When you leave, she said simply. All 500 ships released, fully intact, fully crewed, the moment your fleet withdraws past the outer boundary. A pause. And the 1,200 inside the threshold, their weapons restore on withdrawal. 2. You leave the same fleet you came in with. Everyone goes home. Drax looked at the tactical display one last time. 4,217 ships. His fleet. The number he'd held in the back of his mind since the moment they came out of fold space at the edge of this system, constant as a heartbeat. It was still there. All of them still existed. That was not nothing. He thought about the 6-star systems that called him Fleet Sovereign, and what he would tell them when he returned, and what they would do with he told them, and whether any of it would matter against the simple fact of what humanity had built in the silence, and what it meant that they had built it. He would deal with all of that later. Right now he had one decision, and the decision was clear. I'll need time to consider withdrawal terms, he said. Of course, Chen said. I'm not going anywhere. A pause. Neither are we, she added. And it landed with a quietness that hit harder than a shout. Drax closed his eyes, opened them. Give me 2 hours, he said. You have 2 hours, she said. The channel stayed open. She left it open. All the channels, all the time. Nothing to hide. Nothing that needed privacy. Because she held 500 of his ships in a pocket of folded space-time, and 1,200 more in a web that turned warships into furniture. And there was nothing he could plan in 2 hours that the Sol defense grid could not answer. And she knew that. And she knew that he knew that. And still she gave him 2 hours, because that was the kind of people they were. The kind that had become this. The 2 hours passed the way long hours pass when there is nothing useful left to do. Slowly, and with the particular quality of time that has already been decided but has not yet caught up to itself. Drax spent them the way he said he would, thinking. He pulled every file he had, not just the intelligence archive on humanity. He'd read that twice already and it had stopped being useful. He pulled the tactical assessments from his fleet commanders, the engineering reports on the weapons systems that had gone quiet inside the web, the preliminary analysis from his science division on what the fold anchor might mean, in terms of the physical principles behind it. He read all of it. He read the parts that confirmed what he already knew, and the parts that told him things he hadn't known. And at the end of 2 hours, the shape of the situation had not changed, but he understood it more completely, which was all he had asked of the 2 hours. In the room behind the bridge, in the small officer's ready room where Bress had retreated to give Drax space to think, Bress sat with the young officer who had spoken out of turn and had not been silenced for it. The junior officer's name was Ren First Campaign, 3 months out of the academy. He was sitting with his hands flat on the table and looking at them with the expression of someone whose understanding of the universe had shifted under him without warning, the way ground shifts in a quake, and he was waiting to see what was still standing when it stopped. Bress did not tell him what to think. He was not that kind of senior officer. He said, "You're going to write this down when we get back. Everything you saw today, everything you heard. You're going to write it in your own words and you're going to keep it." Ren looked up. "Why?" "Because in 30 years you're going to be sitting where I'm sitting," Bress said. "And the person sitting where you're sitting now is going to need to know what this looked like from inside it." Ren said nothing for a moment. "Do you think anyone will believe it?" he said. Bress thought about that. "No," he said. "Not at first. Write it anyway." In the main chamber of the Olympus Mons bunker, 12 meters below the surface of Mars, General Yara Chen was eating a meal that had been cold for 90 minutes, and had been cold for 90 minutes the last 3 times someone had brought it to her as well. She ate it without complaint. Cold food was not the kind of problem she had the energy to have feelings about today. Around her, the bunker operated at the particular frequency of controlled intensity, not panic, never panic. The people in this room had trained too long for panic, but a kind of focused aliveness, every station manned, every display updating, the soft, steady sound of voices exchanging information in short sentences. The bunker had 10,000 people in it, distributed across its levels and corridors and operations rooms, and right now all 10,000 of them were doing their jobs the way they had practiced doing their jobs, and the fact that the practice had become real was something most of them were handling better than Chen had expected. She had expected at least some of them to cry. Some of them were in the corridors away from the stations. She had seen it. She didn't say anything about it. They were entitled. Priya appeared at her elbow. Priya, who was 26 years old and had been assigned to the General's operations team 8 months ago, and had shown in those 8 months the particular quality of intelligence that expressed itself not as speed but as depth, the kind that sat with a problem until it understood it rather than running past it to the answer. "He's been quiet for 90 minutes, Priya said. "I know. Is that good or bad?" Chen took another bite of cold food. "It means he's thinking. Thinking is good." She looked at the display showing the Voth formation, the 1,500 ships inside the threshold sitting weaponless and still, the outer fleet holding its position in the dark. A fleet sovereign who thinks is better than one who doesn't. "What do you think he's thinking about?" Chen set her fork down, looked at the display for a moment. "The same thing I'd be thinking about," she said. "How to go home and describe what he found here without it sounding like an excuse." Priya was quiet for a moment. "Will he tell the truth?" "He'll tell what he saw," Chen said. "Whether that counts as the truth depends on how well his people listen." She picked her fork back up. "That part's not our problem." The 2 hours ended, and Drax opened the channel. General Chen, Fleet Sovereign. Still present, still the same voice. "I'm going to ask you a question," he said, "and I want an honest answer." I've been giving you honest answers. I know. This one is different. He paused. He had spent the last 20 minutes finding the right words for this, and he was not sure he had found them. Why didn't you come for us first? Silence. You have fold anchors, he said. You have the web. You have 961 ships and whatever is still inside those doors on Mars that you haven't shown me yet. You've had this capability for, some of it for at least 20 years. You knew what the Voth had done to 12 other systems. You knew about the hegemony and the Teresi. His voice stayed even. You could have come for us. You could have come for anyone you wanted. You chose not to. I want to know why. The silence stretched. Chen set her fork down for the last time. She looked at the display. At the 4,000 alien ships sitting in her system, 1,200 of them currently held inside a web their builders had spent decades laying. 500 of them tucked into a fold anchor that had taken 22 years and many lives to make real, and the rest of them waiting in the dark for an order that she was going to make sure never came. She thought about the engineers, not as a group, as people. Mara, who had designed the first web node and died of a heart attack at 61 before the network was 20% complete, and who had known she wouldn't live to see it finished and had kept working anyway. June, who had spent 14 years underground on the Fold Anchor project and come up blinking at the sun when it finally worked and sat on the surface of Mars looking up at a sky he had almost forgotten the color of. The soldiers who had trained for 30 years for a war they had hoped every single one of those years would not come. She thought about what it had cost. Then she opened her mouth and gave Drax the answer she had been carrying for a long time. Because we're not you, she said. 3 words. She left them there the way you leave something down when you've carried it long enough. Drax said nothing. Not an insult, she said. A statement of fact. The Voth expand because expansion is what the Voth do. It's your history, your economy, your identity. The hegemony consumes. The Teresi were consumed. Every species out there is doing the thing their history made them do, and most of the time they're not even making a choice about it anymore. A pause. We made a choice. 31 years ago we looked at the galaxy, and we decided what kind of species we were going to be. Not what kind of species we had been. We'd been plenty of things, most of them bad. What kind of species we were going to be from that point. Her voice was steady. We decided we were going to be the kind that stays home. Drax sat with that. That's it, he said. That's it. You built all of this, he said, to stay home. We built all of this, she said, so that staying home was a choice we could actually make, so that nobody could take it from us. A pause. There's a difference between staying home because you can't leave and staying home because you decided to. The bridge of the Sovereign's Reach was very quiet. Drax looked at Bress, who had returned from the ready room and was standing at his side again, and Bress had an expression that Drax recognized. The expression of a man hearing something that was going to sit with him for the rest of his life. I'm going to withdraw, Drax said. I know, Chen said, and again there was that quality of not quite gentleness in her voice, the exhausted, careful thing. I'm going to make one request. Ask my ships, the 500 in the Fold Anchor. I want to talk to the crew of one of them. Just one. I want confirmation that what you told me about the condition of the ships is true. A pause. That's reasonable, she said. Stand by. 30 seconds, then a new voice on the channel, male, slightly shaken, but present and clearly functional, speaking in Voth with a strong accent. This is Captain Han of the Immovable Truth. We're intact. I don't understand what happened to us, but we are intact. Crew is accounted for. Ship is undamaged. We are in. I don't know what we're in. It looks like space, but the stars are wrong. Everything else is fine. Drax closed his eyes for 1 second. Opened them. Thank you, Captain, he said. He closed the secondary channel. General Chen, he said. Fleet Sovereign. I'm broadcasting on all Voth frequencies. I want you to hear what I say. A pause. All right. He opened the all-fleet broadcast. Every Voth ship in the Sol system, and through the relay stations stretching back into Voth space. Every command post and fleet station and operations center that was connected to the network. He did not prepare a speech. He had spent 2 hours thinking and none of it had gone toward a speech. Because the situation did not need a speech. It needed a report. Fleet Sovereigns wrote reports. This is Fleet Sovereign Drax. I am transmitting from the Sol system, 3rd planet Sun, current position at Mars orbital approach. The Sol system is not an unclaimed system. It is not a dead system. Humanity is present and functional, and in possession of defensive technology that significantly exceeds our current capabilities. Details to follow in full after withdrawal. A pause. He chose the next words with care. The humans did not fire on us. They have offered withdrawal terms under which all fleet vessels are returned intact. I am accepting those terms. The Armada will withdraw. He paused one final time. Do not come here. That is not a recommendation. It is information. Do with it what you will. He closed the broadcast. The channel back to Chen was still open, she said. Thank you for the broadcast. It was accurate, he said. I know. A pause. Fleet Sovereign, one more thing. Yes. The hegemony is going to hear that broadcast. So is everyone else connected to the relay network. I don't know what they'll do with it. Her voice was not asking for anything. It was not making a threat. It was the voice of someone sharing information they thought was relevant. We're ready for whoever comes. I want you to know that. Not to frighten you. To give you something accurate to put in your report. Drax looked at his tactical display one final time. At the Sol system as it actually was. Not the dead system in his briefing file. The real one, full and defended and patient and awake. It will be in the report, he said. Journey, she said. He closed the channel. The withdrawal took 6 hours. Orderly, formation intact. The way Drax ran every operation, precisely and without theater. As each segment of the fleet crossed back past the outer threshold, the weapons, systems on the ships inside the web came back online one by one, and when the last interfleet vessel crossed the line, the web released its hold and the diagnostics cleared, and then the fold anchor opened and 500 ships fell back into normal space in a cluster at the Mars orbital line. Exactly as Chen had promised, intact, crewed, undamaged, the stars around them the right stars in the right places. Captain Han's immovable truth. Sitting at the center of the cluster, slightly bewildered and fully functional. They joined the withdrawal. Drax watched the Sol system shrink on his display from the viewport of the Sovereign's reach. The yellow star getting smaller, Mars going back to a dot, the human formation above it holding its position until the last Voth ship crossed the outer threshold, and then, because Chen was apparently that kind of person, one of the human ships broke formation briefly and held position at the threshold line, not aggressive, just present, watching them go. Then it turned and rejoined its formation, and the threshold was empty and the Sol system was behind them. He sent one final transmission before they entered fold space for the journey home. He directed it at the surface of Mars, at whatever receiver was in the installation under Olympus Mons, and he composed it alone at his station without Bress or anyone else. In Voth, because that was how this conversation had begun. We came to take a dead world. We found something else. We will report what we found. What the rest of the galaxy does with this information is not my concern. We will not be returning. He read it over once, then added at the end a phrase that did not have an exact translation in any human language, but that the linguists on Earth would spend 3 years debating the rendering of, settling finally on something close to. We did not know you were home. He sent it. Then he took his fleet into fold space and was gone, in the bunker under Olympus Mons, in the main chamber with the displays and the 10,000 people, and the cold food and the soft steady sound of professional voices doing their work. Priya read the final transmission over Chen's shoulder. She read it twice. Then she said, "What do we do now?" Chen stood up, stretched her back. She was 53 years old and had spent a significant portion of those years underground, and the underground had opinions about backs that she had simply chosen to live with. She looked at the display one last time, the Voth drive signatures fading in the outer system getting small, and then the fold space signatures as the fleet jumped, and then nothing, clean space, her space. The Sol system as it was supposed to look on her displays, monitored, defended, and quiet. Now, she said, we wait for the next one, and we hope the Voth talk loud enough that there isn't one. She turned from the display and headed for the corridor. And we finish breakfast, she said over her shoulder. It's been cold for 6 hours and I'm not wasting it. Priya laughed. It sounded a little like crying, but only a little, and only for a second. Then she followed the general down the corridor, past the stations and the personnel and the hum of the system that had held the world, and let the moment pass quietly, and the bunker went on doing what it had always done. Being ready, staying ready, going nowhere, home.